Well, if you're new to us tonight, welcome. We are the Knoxville History Project. Our mission is to research and promote the history and culture of Knoxville. Also, want to plug in, encourage you, if you have anything under the bed or in a closet that's related to Knoxville history that you'd like to share with us through our Knoxville shoebox. I've had a bunch of postcards from Amy Vineyard today, which have been really neat, including this one. And I was a little puzzled by this. I think I've seen this picture before, but I was puzzled a little bit why it has this kind of rectangular shape in the middle. And it's because inside it has these 12 little images, photographs of around Knoxville, including right at the top is right near where Jack and I are based at the History Project offices. We're just the other side of the Catholic Church, and here's the old Catholic high school that was sat there. Can't remember which year that went away, but obviously it's no longer there. Right about, I guess, about where their hotel is, really, the hotel property. So if you do have any photographs that kind of show Knoxville in a good light, or have interesting buildings, or railroads, or cars, or interesting people, we would love to hear from you. And you can learn more about it and connect with us through our portal online at the Knoxville Shoebox page. And as I mentioned a few weeks ago, we are also doing a monthly column and online. It's part of West Knoxville Lifestyle, and their website, because it's kind of a national chain, is through citylifestyle.com. So if you'd like to read more captions and some gems that people have sent in, please check those out. And I'll put that link in the chat box in a bit. Also, Eric Dawson is with us tonight, is one of our featured guest authors in the last two story publications we've done. He did one on the Seven Dwarfs film a couple of years ago that we showed in Knoxville Lives. Snow White, I'm thinking of, I'm going blank there. And his latest story is about Newman Wise, who he'll be mentioning tonight in the latest story collection that we did just before Christmas. So many of you have already got it, but you'll put a face to a name, as it were, today. If you haven't seen it, you can get that at the only place in town you can get this is through KHP and Union Avenue Books. So you can buy that on our shop page. Also, I want to sincere thank you to two council members, Lynn Fugate and Charles Thomas, for making a donation to support this Zoom series through this year, through the City 202 funds, which is discretionary funds that City Council members have. So thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Charles, for helping fund the work that we do every week. So Jack, over to you if you'd like to introduce Eric.
Right, thanks a lot, Paul, and thanks everybody for joining us. Jazzbilly is a new term to many people, an odd word, but it's an old concept, and it goes way back. It goes, it may remind you of rockabilly, and rockabilly may make you think of Elvis Presley, who, of course, for many years, I think the shorthand version of American culture is that there was black culture and white culture, and Elvis Presley was the guy that combined the two of them in 1954 when he made his first record. Well, it's a lot more complicated and a lot older and a lot more interesting than that, actually. And I think this is what we're going to talk about a lot, how a lot of that happened right here in Knoxville, thanks to our friend Eric Dawson. About 15 years ago, I worked for Metropulse, the weekly, and there was another weekly paper that was kind of challenging us for hipness, more or less, and that was called the Knoxville Voice. And we didn't worry about it a whole lot at the time, but there was one writer there who was pretty good, and we kind of wished he was working for Metropulse at the time. And his name was Eric Dawson. He was the music editor of the Knoxville Voice. But he later got to work on the same publication for a while when he was a writer for the Knoxville Mercury and was writing great music history stories for that paper that KHP was involved with in for his 2.5 year life. But lately he's been the executive director of the Tennessee Archive of Moving Image and Sound, which has done incredible work. If you've never, if you're not familiar with them, we should have Eric on sometime to talk about what they do. They do it all from this subterranean laboratory down underneath the History Center. But they find, preserve, and index audio recordings and film that might otherwise be lost or piled up somewhere, so it's hard to get to. But they they've saved a lot of stuff in the nick of time. Stuff going back to the dawn of motion pictures and the dawn of audio recording here in Knoxville. And of course, this was a very interesting place for audio recording, considering the fact that we had these radio stations that were putting these musicians on the air for the first time in many cases. But this, we want to have him back to do a show just about TAMIS, but this is his show about Jazzbilly, about the connections between jazz and hillbilly, which is what we used to call country music, and how they weren't really that different from each other, but they were kind of evolving and mutating and combining, recombining in different ways in the early days. But I'm grateful to have Eric here to tell us how it happened, and he's got some. We've had a few perhaps audio and video issues with this, but we'll see how it works. I guess has some actual footage that a lot of people have not seen or heard. Most people have not seen or heard anyway. But without further ado, Eric Dawson, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks for that generous introduction, and thanks to you and Paul for inviting me to do this. We've done a few in the past, and it's always fun. I also want to say thanks to, I believe I saw Nelda Hill here earlier from the Knox County Public Library, and a known music fan and live music fan and jazz fan. She's the one who suggested this program a couple of years ago for the Music on the Mezzanine series, and I've since gone back and sort of redid some things and added some things to it, because things just keep turning up, as they always do, and we just keep learning more. And Jack, you've already touched on this thing about Jazzbilly. What is it? Is it really a thing? I couldn't find any mention of the word searching newspaper databases before the 1990s. And obviously it's like portmanteau of jazz and hillbilly music, which hillbilly was a marketing term used for records in the 20s through the 40s, the old time string band, fiddle music. Country music wasn't really a term until post-war times that was used widely. So these were called hillbilly records. And if you know musicians, or if you're one yourself, you probably know a lot of them don't like to be classified as a genre. It's kind of feel limiting. But it's helpful. It's helpful in marketing, and it's also helpful to just communicate. You know how jazz is different than heavy metal, for instance. But I think what happened in the 90s, if you remember, there was this sort of like swing music revival, and also a revival of kind of honky tonk, Dwight Yoakam, Bakersfield style music. And a lot of bands started calling themselves Jazzabilly. It never really caught on. I don't think it's used much, but what we're talking about is, as Jack said, this combination of country and jazz and how they informed each other through the early 20th century up to around the 1970s, and particularly in Knoxville. Now, old time music, I've always found it interesting, was called old time music even as far back as the 1800s. You can find that term in newspapers and books, because what it's referring to is music that immigrants from England, Scotland, and Ireland were playing, and obviously it was old tunes from the old country, and so there was already a nostalgic bent to this kind of music, usually played with strings. Obviously, the fiddle, violin into the fiddle was an important part of it, and it would grow and continue to change as people continued to add more different lyrics to these old tunes, and also change the tunes to where it's going. Even now people play what's called old time music, and it's these same tunes that were played hundreds of years ago with some variations in America, and even in the old country, as it were. And of course, jazz came out of New Orleans around the turn of the century, 1900 or so, with it grew out of ragtime and blues, and developed, of course, by African Americans in New Orleans. And then what happens is radio and phonograph records begin to disseminate this music and spread it. So you're not just listening to music from your community anymore. You're listening to music from all across the country and the world, really. Combine that with things like the Great Migration, where so many African Americans move north and west to find work, as do a lot of working class white people to find jobs. And you just have this kind of cross-pollination and this music informing each other. I'm sure you're familiar with one swing. It was pretty big in the 1920s. You know, just sold millions of records. Bands like Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys and the Light Crust Doughboys. From Texas to Great Plains of California, that was kind of a popular thing. In 1930, Jimmie Rodgers, the singing brakeman, who's one of the most popular and best-selling hillbilly artists, records a song called Blue Yodel No. 9, and has Louis Armstrong and Lil Hardin play on it. One of the most popular and best-selling jazz artists in America. So you've already, by 1930, got this sort of crossover between these musics. I do want to say, though, it's obviously that it's not the most, this isn't across the board. It's not copacetic. You have people like Henry Ford, famously, the auto manufacturer industrialist, who really saw jazz as a cultural threat, to the extent that he started organizing square dances and fiddle contests and really trying to support this music as a counter to jazz, even going so far as to have it tried to implement programs in education in schools. So it's not as if there's a completely happy harmony here, but I think it's more than most people realize, because sort of by 50s and 60s, it tends to get more segregated, but it was way more of a mixture early on. Talking about Western swing, there was something a little bit different going on in East Tennessee and Knoxville at that time. You know, jazz by the 1920s was such a popular format that you had in Knoxville a lot of big bands or swing bands, primarily white musicians that were playing country clubs, social events, and more Tony places to more well-heeled audiences. And things like string band, old time music, that was going on at Market Hall, down at Market Square, barn dances, house parties, things like that. And you're more well-respected, or people who consider themselves more cultured or well-respected might not want to engage with that as much. And then, of course, in the area that's known as the Old City now, it's a larger African-American population that was playing more hot jazz and blues sort of numbers. And along with this, what happens in the late 1920s, these record companies decide that it's cheaper to, rather than haul all these musicians up to New York or Chicago or Dallas or Atlanta or wherever the record recording studios are, it's cheaper to take the recording equipment to smaller cities across America, such as Bristol, Tennessee, which is 1927. You've got the big bang of country music with Jimmie Rodgers, Carter Family recording. Next year, 28, they come to Johnson City and record. So 1929, the Brunswick Vocalion Company comes to Knoxville to record. 1930 as well. About 100 sides were recorded there. And what makes these sessions different from the Bristol and Johnson City is that, in addition to the wealth of old-time hillbilly music, which predominantly that's what it is, you still have some black string band music. You've got jazz, black gospel. It's just Knoxville's a more cosmopolitan city, so there's more variety there. But probably the greatest or most lasting discovery from that session was Howard Armstrong, Carl Martin, and Ted Bogan, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, especially Howard Armstrong, whose nickname was Louie Bluie. They recorded two sides, Knox County Stomp and Vine Street Drag, which you've probably heard. It's great, sort of like hot string band music with, you know, kind of a rural feel to it. I don't know if I call it country, but we'll hear that here in a moment. And the first people to record that day was a band called the Tennessee Ramblers. They were the first ones in the sessions. And it was a family string band. And One of the members was a young woman named Willie Sievers. She played guitar. And this is kind of unusual because you didn't really have a lot of women in string bands at that time recording. The Carter family were probably the first, and Willie might have been the second. It's not that many have turned up. And what's fascinating is that years later, when Howard Armstrong returns to Knoxville or East Tennessee to perform at the World's Fair, Terry Zwigoff, filmmaker, is following him along and to make a documentary about him. And they go to La Follette, of course, which is where he was from. But they also stop at Norris at the Big Valley Music Barn. And the proprietor of the place recognized him and knew immediately who he was. So he calls up Willie Sievers and her brother Max Sievers, who are still performing, who they know, plays at the Big Valley Barn. And he says, come down to the barn. Let's play some music. He doesn't tell them that Howard Armstrong is there. He just invites them down. They show up, and they're surprised, and it's a reunion, and they end up playing music together, which Terry Zwigoff filmed and included in his documentary Louie Bluie, which came out in 1986. So I just think that's a fascinating incident of these people 50 years after the fact coming together. And what's more, in the clip we're about to see, we're going to watch a little segment of video here. The first thing you're going to see is film that Jim Thompson made of downtown Knoxville, 1929, where some of these artists who recorded at the Knoxville sessions were there. The film is silent, so we've put the Tennessee Chocolate Drops. By the way, that was the name that the record company gave to Armstrong, Martin, and Bogan. It wasn't, they didn't call themselves that. In fact, later, Howard Armstrong thought that was a really, racist thing. But so they were called Tennessee Chocolate Drops and recorded there. And then you'll hear that song, and then you're going to see the footage of Willie Sievers and Armstrong playing in '82 with Bob Cox on guitar. And then an interview with Willie Sievers in 1989 from outtake from the Heartland series, talking about Howard Armstrong and his brothers and what she learned from them. And then finally, we'll see footage of Howard Armstrong's return to Knoxville in 2000 for the dedication of the Old City music mural. And that will also, you'll recognize a young Jack Neely in that clip as well. And Jack, I don't know if you have anything to add or if you want to say something afterwards or if you want to just roll the clip.
No, that's great. I was honored to get to talk to Howard Armstrong a few times and wrote a few, interviewed him and he had a lot of memories. He lived in Knoxville basically from the very late teens. He grew up in La Follette, but lived in Knoxville from 1919, 1920 up until the early 30s when he went to Chicago. He was here mostly, and he's one of the first people I've ever seen of any race listed in the city directories as a musician. He and Carl Martin lived together over in the to connect our Zooms together. They lived in the area that was wiped out by urban renewal on what was called Yeager Street, which doesn't exist anymore. But they're just a couple of young musicians who lived together and played together. And Carl Martin had his own following, completely another kind of style of music, and they kind of split up doing different things in Chicago. But anyway, he was a fascinating guy and really gave a richness and texture to his memories of Knoxville in the 20s that I have not heard from anybody else. But but go ahead. I could rattle on and on about Howard Armstrong.
Yeah, so these, as I've just described to you, these are the clips we'll see, and this segment is about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and sort of I'll introduce the next audio-video segment. That's, it's divided up into about 4 different things, telling the story across the 20th century, really. But Paul, take it away.
fact in the end that that's really a hard number to do.
Which one you like best?
Which one of the instruments you mean? I like the guitar.
Why?
I don't know. I just always liked the guitar. And it's an instrument you can play a lot of blues on, and I like blues, and you hear it a lot on guitars, and I just took a liking to it.
Who'd you learn your blues from?
Well, the Armstrongs that lived in Knoxville, the Armstrong boys, Howard and his brother. Like I said, my dad used to take Mac and I down there on Jackson and Central, and they were playing then, and they played the acoustic guitars, nothing electric, and they had a big bass fiddle that they played, and we'd go down there and listen to them play, and they just had a touch on the blues that you can't get, and we liked it. We liked it well enough till we learned it.
We want you to talk about Martin and Bogan there.
Well, there's not very much I can say about Martin and Bogan that could be printable. But I went through thick and thin with them. Mostly thick. Mostly thick. Yeah, Martin and Bogan played with me, and another guy was not around, Bill Bounton and everything. Only reason I'm around is because I outrun all of them that much. Yeah, we played all over, most everywhere, you know, and we did Skipping, Skipping is street talk for street musicians. See.
He's 91.
How come
She just asked me if you were 91.
Why don't you get a camera? You must be talking about my dad. Come up here with that old 91.
You're not 91 now.
Jack Neely, I spoke to you the other day.
Oh yeah, how do you do, my
I sure
friend?
appreciate you coming down. This is a great honor.
Well, I'm right here. You know what? It's an old saying. Only the dead don't come back. And that's because they can't get none. They tell all kinds of tales about
You did all of them? Or it's a
up
group?
there around in probably Tennessee.
What's your name?
We didn't say gold.
Fieldson. Fieldson.
Yeah. And I didn't play much blues because we didn't, you know, it was kind of a down step for you if you were black and played blues, old low down dirty blues, playing for a Sadiddy, you know, like here. Sadiddy, upper crust black audience or a white audience. I know I was playing one time over in the Follett, you know, for J. Will Taylor, Congressman Taylor. And we were just getting down on it, you know. And the guy came up and said, wait a minute. He said, what kind of music is that you fellas playing? One of them said, we be playing some blues.
Oh, yeah,
He said, by God, you better turn them red because we don't want to hear none of that jungle stuff over here. And that's what it was. But now, man, anybody plays blues for them. What is it?
Okay, wow, that Jack, when's the last time you saw that?
Oh, I don't know. I think I saw it after you all found it. It's been a couple of years.
Okay, yeah.
I didn't realize I was on the camera.
Oh yeah.
I was just down there to say a few words and get to talk to him a little bit. But it was a great day, beautiful sunny day, and a good turnout. And you also see Sparky Ruckers in the picture sometimes too. There's a local blues guy, well known around here. But,
right, and Sparky's a great example of someone who combines, you know, several different types of music, still performs today, and you know he's got folk, blues, some jazz influences as well. So
yeah.
Live.
But that's great to get Willie on tape talking about meeting them at the corner of Jackson and Central. I mentioned that in the Old City book after I heard that, because that was a meeting place for the whole city. I guess that's the one place the whole city came together. The white and black and immigrants and everybody else were right there at that corner of Jackson and Central in those days. And there was a place where people would wait to be picked up to take random jobs in yards and gardens all over the city, but also a place where people would just play pickup music, 80, 90, 100 years ago. And that was, the Armstrongs were among those guys who would just hang out down there. But,
yeah, they were, as I understand it, or Howard said in an interview later with Terry Zwigoff that was published in 78 Quarterly Journal, that they basically discovered them in a barber shop down there. When the Vocalion people had come through in 1929, but in 1930, they came back a few months later to record, and I think they went looking for a bit of a broader, and rather than a newspaper ad, they actually went down to the old city, or what's now known as it.
Yeah, there were some. I'd love to. There's a lot still to learn about. Kind of try to chart all the cool barbershops, because a lot of them had different reputations, but they were all. Howard used to talk about what he called pulling doors, and that was he'd walk up and down the street and just pull a door, no matter whose door it was, and walk in and start playing until they threw him out, or if they didn't throw him out, he'd probably get a few nickels from the folks. Barbershops were a place to play and get some, make some money.
And the next part of the video, the part it's chronologically we're going here. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Midday Merry-Go-Round on WNOX, hosted by Lowell Blanchard from 1936 to 1961. It was really famous for launching the careers of a lot of country music stars, people that would go on to bigger fame in Nashville or just have longer careers. But what I think a lot of people don't know is it actually started out, the first few years, it was way more jazz heavy and sort of pop music heavy than country music. Again, country music didn't exist as such then, but there weren't even a whole lot of old time musicians on there. There were a few, and the String Dusters got their start there, which is the group with Homer and Jethro and a few other people. But it was primarily jazz. And something I just found out recently, I didn't know this, but in 1938, there was a black quartet called the Cabineers who performed on the air. They were from South Carolina, came through town sort of auditioned, got on air, and they were such a hit that they got 2 encores and then came back several times to perform. And they did spirituals, they did jazz and blues sort of thing. So this is the kind of thing that was on the midday merry-go-round at the time. And I also find it interesting that they, in the Sentinel, there's mention of them performing at different public performers with the string dusters. So you have, you know, a African-American band and a white band, sort of like a more hillbilly style with jazz combined with this other band. And I doubt that the audience was integrated at that time, 1938. But one of the things they played was like a celebration or convention for local hotel workers and hotel porters, and there were a lot of African-American hotel porters at that time. So it does make me wonder more about that. But beyond that, I mean, the reason we know, aside from newspaper ads, that jazz was the primary kind of thing is because the oldest surviving recording from the merry-go-round dates back to 1937, recorded off air Friday, November 19th, 1937 to be exact. It's an hour long, and what you have is the Dixieland Swingsters were the house band then. So Dave Durham, Jerry Collins, who a lot of people remember fondly. I don't think on the recording we're about to hear that Harry Nides was in it, but Harry Nides, a really interesting figure. He was in the Dixieland Swingsters later on, and he played in jazz bands, he played in country bands, different WNOX bands, but he was also in the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra and was something of a music educator as well. In the 70s, there would be a sort of like a benefit concert tribute to him to raise money for music education. Chet Atkins actually came back for it. He really respected him and had a lot of affection for Harry Nides, obviously. But as I said, the recording's an hour long, 4 sides, 15 minutes each on these big transcription discs. The History Center closes at 5:30, so I'm doing this from my home, and no way am I carrying anything out of there, or I would, you know, have these props to show you. But since we can't listen to an hour of it, I've excerpted about 4 minutes. But I just want to give you an idea of what's on that program from 1937. Haywire Dave Durham, as Lowell Blanchard introduces him, who's part of the Dixie Swingsters. He plays trumpet, and he's accompanied by the hottest fiddle player on the air, and blazes through 2 jazzy fiddle tunes. And then accordion player Tony Musco plays 2 numbers that are jazz and polka influenced, and not much country there. And a group called Tex and Curly, the Arizona Cowboys, play. But even their song, Back to Old Smoky Mountain, is more of a swing song than Western. And then sort of a comic performer known as Muck plays a song called Oh Susanna, Dust Off That Old Piano. Try that again. Oh Susanna, Dust Off That Old Piano. And that's a song that was covered by Fats Waller and the Harlem Hot Shots. It's more of a saloon jazzy song, sort of like the style Willie Sievers we heard her playing, than it is country. And then Dixieland Swingsters play Touched in the Head, Ragtime, and Lowell Blanchard steps to the mic and sings like a crooner song, Waiting at the End of the Road. So again, this hour-long midday merry-go-round, there's very little country in there. It's more leans towards jazz. But I also think this is an interesting period because when we talk about genre, it's still not that well defined. I mean, this stuff isn't necessarily jazz. It's pop, you know, it's a form of pop music that's popular, combining sort of like crooning, jazz, swing, a bit of old time. So we're going to hear an excerpt from that recording. Lowell Blanchard will introduce it. You'll hear the Dixieland Swingsters sing, and then you'll hear Lowell do the outro. And while we hear that, we're going to see a midday merry-go-round live broadcast from Chilhowie Park in 1948, which by that time, it's a little more country. You'll see Archie Campbell, Carl Story, people like that. But the Swingsters are still in the mix as well. They're there performing. And this is from the Archie Campbell film collection, 1948. It's silent, so we'll see that. Then there's some photos of the Swingsters and Harry Nides and other people. So Paul, if you want to roll that video.
The midday merry-go-round is on the air. fellas, and howdy, howdy, folks everywhere. This is your old midday merry-go-round bunch of entertainers on the air with a brand good show for everybody. How's everybody feeling? Say that's fine for those of you that feel pretty good. Those of you who don't feel so good, you listen to me a little later on in the program. By the way, it's raining in Knoxville, or it's raining where you are, too. Well, we're sorry of that, but then, you know, we've got the sunshine. Open up your windows and let a little sunshine flow right outside to your neighbor next door, because we're going to put it out of your loudspeaker right now. Saturday edition of the Midday Merry-Go-Round on the air tomorrow at 12 o'clock noon. Come on down and join in the fun with the boys. Tomorrow, Sophronia Apple will be here. Mushmouth and Smokey will make their appearance, and it'll be a grand time for everybody. Remember, the Midday Merry-Go-Round on the air tomorrow at 12 o'clock noon, and until then, Lowell Blanchard and all the boys bid you goodbye. Lots of good luck, and we'll be seeing you.
program of the Midday Merry-Go-Round, starring Lowell Blanchard and all the gang, reached you from our auditorium studios at the New Sentinel Station.
Okay, so yeah, I'm fascinated with that early history of the merry-go-round because again, it's just so associated with country music, and to hear what those early shows.
Yeah, like. And to look at those folks, considering that Lowell Blanchard was from Chicago, and sometimes he dropped his East Tennessee accent, and Chicago came out a good deal more. But people like Tony Musco, who was Italian, and Harry Nidus, who was Jewish. This was a diverse group of people who were putting forth this music in those days, and it wasn't just waspy country guys from the mountains who were playing here. It was all sorts of people. But anyway, it's fascinating. I don't know if you're going to get into. I saw Chet Atkins there, and he considered himself a jazz artist, and talked in his autobiography called A Country Gentleman about how he backstage at the Midday Merry-Go-Round. Have you heard the story that backstage there was one copy of a record by a guy who was new to America named Django Reinhardt, the gypsy jazz practitioner, a great guitar player, and Chet Atkins was inspired by what he heard on this record, and he says that his whole style came from him failing to sound like Django Reinhardt. He, as a teenager, was trying to hear this play like this guy on this record that he'd never seen before. It was in France, but it came back here, and it's interesting comparisons between Django Reinhardt, and I think we're going to get to Stéphane Grappelli later. They were already playing together on those first records that they made that were available in America. But they had some similarities to Howard Armstrong and Carl Martin, what they were doing too. So it's all kind of a world music that was going on together and influencing talented young guys like Chet to do something different. The first time Chet ever did a solo show in Knoxville, he called himself a jazz artist, jazz guitarist. So we think of him as country, but it was all crossing over all that time with it, like everything else. But
yeah, you've set up the next segment perfectly, because you can't really talk about country music or Jazzabilly without Chet Atkins and Homer and Jethro, because Homer and Jethro are known, especially like Chet, to be country artists. And Homer and Jethro, actually, when they showed up to WNOX to audition at an amateur show in the 30s, Lowell Blanchard disqualified them because they were too much like jazz. But he saw potential, so he set them up in a band called the String Dusters with Jethro's brother H.E. Burns on bass, and a fantastic guitarist who I think gets overlooked a lot named Charlie Hageman, who unfortunately for time I cut that segment from this, but I've included it on TAMIS's Vimeo page. We can send links if you want to hear. Later he would give music lessons, guitar lessons at Broadway Sound, owned by Lynn Clapp. And in 1975, he sat down with someone and recorded like a jam session. And it's just a really nice, fluid jazz guitar sound. But he was in the String Dusters with Homer and Jethro, H.E. Burns. And they were also playing on NOX at this time. As I mentioned, they played a show with the African-American Quartet. And Chet started at WNOX actually as a fiddler, and soon switched to guitar, which, as we know, was a great idea. But you mentioned Django and Stéphane Grappelli. Homer Haynes, or Jethro Burns rather, who played mandolin, in an interview in the New Sentinel with Wayne Bledsoe in the 80s, he said that he never listened to mandolinists, really. He didn't get his style, or he wasn't influenced by country and country mandolin so much as Stéphane Grappelli's violin playing. So I think that's interesting too. It's another connection. And you're right. They, Chet with Homer and Jethro recorded a series of sides in the 50s of jazz records. It was later compiled on an album called Jazz from the Hills. So they're just steeped in it. Chet, of course, later went on to become such a influential guitarist and producer in Nashville. sort of the architect of the countrypolitan sound in a way, but he always, of course, went back to jazz and played. So what we're going to see now is, or hear now rather, it's like 2 acetate discs at TAMIS, which are, for those not familiar, these are home recordings. They're one of one. People record them for reference, just for their own, to listen to or to share with people. And the first is a 1947 acetate with Archie Campbell, Jethro, and Homer. And in the beginning, you can hear they're waiting for Chet Atkins, I presume. And he doesn't show, so they just run through Columbus Stockade Blues. And it's just a good example of how, again, even Archie Campbell, who later becomes known for kind of cornball, hee-haw kind of thing, was in on this. Everybody was listening to this music and playing it. And then right after that, it's a really rare recording, 1942, recorded on a cardboard disc. These acetate discs were had different kinds of lacquers and substances, but there were also cardboard you could record directly into. And this Chet Atkins, whether he was at home in studio, I don't know, but it's 1942. It's pretty early. I don't know that an earlier recording of him exists, home recording at least on guitar. And as you say, Jack, you'll definitely hear the sort of influence of Django in this. And we'll be looking at some photos as we listen to this, about 3 to 4 minute songs. Homer and Jethro shows up at the end.
You did? While we're waiting on Chester there, Archie, we're going down to number 4 school at Cleveland Wednesday night.
Oh, I have to get out.
Okay.
We're out.
That's right.
Way down in Columbus, Georgia, wanna be back in Tennessee. Way down in Columbus, Stockade, friends have turned their backs on me. Go away, leave me if you wish to. Never let me cross your mind. In your heart, you love another. Leave me, darling, I don't mind. Go away, leave me if you wish to. Never let me cross your mind. In your heart, you love another. Leave me, darling, I don't mind.
the most unpredictable entertainers in country music, the crazy, zany Homer and Jethro.
Goodbye, man, we gotta scram down the highway. Stick out your thumb, you son of a gun, going my way. I gotta ride with a guy in a wagon, in a sack on the back, he was a drag. Jambalaya, shoe fly, pine and a pudding. Cause tonight I'm gonna see old Sally Gooden. Danced all night on my feet for a blister. Had to sidetrack her nose when I kissed her. Side by side we was sitting, and just about the time we started a pet, some big hick throwed a brick through the window, hit her side, heard her cry, broke my finger. Jambalaya, horse meat pie on a push cart, flip my lid, always did, love that red heart. It was rough, the meat was tough, but you did slow. Almost choked when some below hollered whoa. Jack the Fork, Mac the Knife, oh. Spotted ham and a can of chocolate-coated sardine. When we sing, it sounds just like a cat and dog fight. But we don't sing for money, just for spite.
I just love that Homer and Jethro are they have such a cornball shtick and, you know, are funny, but the musical sophistication, especially of Jethro Burns, is just amazing.
Yeah, he made a whole record of Django pieces, didn't he? In the 70s, maybe. Yeah. But yeah, they were, and you can only guess what they sounded. We have, I guess, just a tiny fraction of everything they recorded or everything they performed on the radio. So.
Right. There are a few off-air recordings we have at TAMIS where they, and I'm sure Country Music Hall of Fame has some good off-air recordings as well, radio. But, you know, on the other hand, they recorded a lot of records. You know, this was back when albums were 20-something minutes sometimes, and, you know, you put out 2 or 3 a year sometimes. Country artists. I
wonder if the 78 that Chet Atkins, and it inspired him so much, is the same one that Jethro Burns was listening to at the time, listening to modeling stuff on Stéphane Grappelli.
Yeah, it's possible, and apparently that, as you say, if there was just this one copy backstage, everyone seemed to know it because, you know, going back to the Knoxville sessions, there was a young fiddle player there who recorded with his family called the Wise String Orchestra. His name was Newman Wise, and he's a fascinating figure to me because he records, he shows up in the New Sentinel as winning several fiddle contests on Market Square. He plays dance and everything else. Only records these 2 sides at the Knoxville sessions, and then kind of disappears from music. He doesn't pursue it as a profession. He gets odd jobs here and there, even at Oak Ridge, I think, at one point. But he's not a professional musician. But years later, in the 1970s, when audio technology advances to the point where, you know, you can have the compact cassettes, the plastic tapes, it's an advancement over reel-to-reel, if not in sound, at least in portability and affordability for a lot of people. So Newman buys one of these and he starts recording all of these jam sessions he has with his friends. He's playing with a lot of people he's known for years. The Sievers, Willie Sievers and Max Sievers show up on some of these tapes, Carl Dean. And the reason we know this is because when we were researching the Knoxville Sessions box set the Bear family put out a few years ago, we contacted Newman Wise's daughters, and they pulled out of the closet. They didn't even know it was there. This was actually a couple of years after we initially made contact with them. They called us up and found like 3 boxes full of these audio cassettes, probably a couple hundred of these jam sessions that he had recorded of him and his friends. And the interesting thing about them is that it's not just old time musicians playing. It's they've got jazz people on there. All the songs are written down on the cases, sometimes even what key they're in. And they're playing all kinds of music. They're doing contemporary-ish songs like Puff the Magic Dragon. Hoagie Carmichael's Stardust shows up several times. Obviously, there's old-time tunes, but there's also a lot of jazz standards. And there's a really interesting tape in there that says Django Reinhardt and jazz fiddler Stéphane Grappelli. And one of Newman's friends apparently had recorded this for him. You listen to it, and there's a spoken introduction of him talking about these performers and how he thinks Newman will like them. And then it's 45 minutes of these 78s of recordings of Django Reinhardt and Stéphane Grappelli. But even more fascinating was a tape we found. It said Stéphane Grappelli, jazz fiddler from Paris, Bijou Theater. And lo and behold, it is a tape of the concert that Stéphane Grappelli played when he came to the Bijou in 1981. Newman had snuck this portable tape recorder in, I guess. I don't know that anyone would have given him permission. It is definitely an audience recording, which means it's not the greatest thing in the world, sounding thing. But at the same time, it's a pretty remarkable document, because by that time, 81, the 70s, of course, there was this sort of, newgrass, they call it, where a lot of younger bluegrass performers were learning from older players and adopting different styles and being influenced by all kinds of people. So Grappelli records with Dave Grisman, a popular bluegrass performer. And this cross-pollination, again, continues. And so we have a few minutes of that cassette to play for you. If you've heard an audience bootleg, then you know there's going to be some sound, but that's also part of the artifact. It's fascinating because you hear how enthusiastic the crowd is. You hear presumably Newman just whooping and hooting and having a great time, and so enthusiastic after these solos. So really, it's a document of the audience at the Bijou at the time almost as much as it is Grappelli's concert. And again, it's a really interesting story to me of this person that most people hadn't heard of. He's certainly doesn't have the fame of a Chet or Homer Jethro or whatever. Recorded the first sessions of music recorded in Knoxville, Tennessee. Years later, still at it, and has this treasure trove of field recordings, more or less. And when you hear about field recordings of a fiddle player, you might think of somebody like Tommy Jarrell or this sort of raw, but it's not that at all. It's a far more sort of sophisticated or in conversation with popular music throughout the 20th century. And it's great, but we got to play Grappelli though. I mean, that's the thing to hear, I think. Jack, I don't know if you want to have comments before. It's just a 2-minute segment here, but I don't know if you want to before or after.
I just wish I were there. I don't know why I wasn't. I was living in Fort Sanders at the time. Maybe I probably couldn't afford a ticket, but he was. It's amazing that at his age he was considered very cool at this time. And everybody was talking about Django, who had died 50 years earlier, and Stéphane Grappelli. But and by the way, I do want to mention that your story about Newman Wise is in our Knoxville Lives too. Eric wrote a really great story about his whole musical career, kind of otherwise forgotten violinist.
So just in case I wasn't clear, the first few pictures were of Newman Wise, and then of course there were pictures of his tapes and then ads, and that was Grappelli playing.
Yeah, that's great to hear. That is the first time I've heard that. That's cool.
Oh yeah.
That's well.
I believe I was a guest on Paul West's Jazz Me Blues show on WDVX one night, and we played it. But otherwise, I don't think it has been heard. I mean, we have to be a little careful about just putting everything up online, and there's sort of copyright issues and other things. But it'd certainly be great to have things like this heard more. Get them out there.
Well, it's all fascinating, and there are a lot of gaps to fill in. Still, a lot of work for you and me both to try to get into the meat of this and connect everybody we can connect. To me, that's fascinating. The whole musical history is like a big jigsaw puzzle, and the more you fill in, the more you have to fill in the missing pieces.
And as I say, things turn up all the time, so it just sort of broadens, the view and the picture of what things were like.
It really strikes me, and I've talked to Nelda about this, that in the 40s, jazz and old time went in two completely new directions for each musical form, and they were very similar to each other. Jazz went into bebop, which is usually like a 5-piece thing with a whole lot of improvisation, with a basic tune, a lot of improvisation. Old time went into bluegrass, which was the same thing, a 5-piece band with a whole lot of improvisation on a basic tune. And they were usually white bands on strings versus black bands on horns, but otherwise they're very similar, and they started like the same week in 1947 or so. It's amazing how they were popping up at the same time. I guess bluegrass started a little bit earlier, but it's fascinating. It seems more than a coincidence to me that those things were happening all at once and very similar, and they're really not that different in a way, if you look at it that way. But all these people are borrowing stuff from each other, and I love Willie Seaver's memories of learning blues from the Armstrongs, and even remembering the corner where it happened. But if you're done, Eric, I guess we're happy to take.
Hey, Eric.
I think we hit it right at 7:15 here. So
Eric, we have a couple of questions on the chat bar. Maybe we could just wrap those up.
Right.
Jonah Horwitz asked, did you mention Jimmy Davis? And he recorded with various black blues guitarists.
Oh no, I mean Jimmy Davis performed in Knoxville some, but I don't know that he was based here. Jack, do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. And what about Willie Sievers? Where did the Sievers family live in Knoxville? You know?
They didn't live here in Knoxville, did they? Didn't they live in Anderson County or somewhere?
Yeah, and they did. And as far as knowing why that is, later Willie Sievers would marry someone named last name of Sharp, Willie Sievers Sharp. And my predecessor there at TAMIS, Bradley Reeves, is just and Louisa Tribe, but Bradley's particularly had this knack for finding things and collecting and just kind of grabbing what you can, and he actually got her mailbox somehow. So we have that down in the archive. But yeah, I think they lived up around in Anderson County.
Yeah, she was a star and kind of a stunt guitarist, sort of in the same way that Jimi Hendrix was. She would play behind her head, and like she did. We saw some of that in the film.
Yeah, she tried to do that a little bit. Well, she did do that a little bit, but the behind the head and between the legs might have been a bit much at that point. But I mean, that was part of the act. A lot of blues and country and jazz and other kind of guitarists would do that. And again, though, I mean, her position as a woman in old time as a guitarist she's kind of a pioneer in a way.
And she and Howard were exactly the same age, both born in 1909. So they were, and they were both, I guess, in their mid 70s at the time they did that late career jam session there.
I wonder. We were in contact with Terry Zwigoff, the Louie Bluie director, back around the time of the stomp, and I didn't think to ask him if there were any outtakes or raw footage. Surely he would have wanted to film their meeting, like their actual sort of, and even more of the jam session. because I don't know if you noticed, but there was a photograph in there. It's a little choppy, but it's a photo that Carl Bean, I believe, took of Terry Zwigoff standing there with a boom mic. And you could clearly see Willie's brother, Mac, playing violin. So they probably played for a good long while. I wonder if any more of that footage is out there.
Yeah, that film, Louie Bluie, was one of Terry Zwigoff's first well-known films, and it was on national PBS in the 80s. Was pretty well known, and he later was, I guess, nominated for an Oscar for the movie about R. Crumb, the cartoonist who also loves this old music. He loves that the kind of counterculture cartoonist, loves this early roots jazz and blues and country music and especially this era when they're kind of hard to distinguish from each other.
Yeah, and I think both Zwigoff and Crumb, even Zwigoff more so, are the kind of music fans and collectors that think nothing good was recorded after like 1945 or something. You know, it's got to be this specific cutoff date.
Yeah.
You can get that video. You can watch that DVD from Lost McGee Library.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great movie. Anyone who hasn't seen it, definitely. And you know, there's another documentary on Howard that was made. I can't remember. I don't know, Nelda, if you know, but the library has that as well. It was made in the 2000s.
Sweet Old Song is about 15 years ago or so. Yeah, it's nicer than Louie Bluie in a way, but I think Howard's wife didn't like. She thought Louie Bluie was a little bit too edgy for his reputation.
Yeah, I guess there should be a parental warning or something for some parts.
Out of curiosity, the cassette tapes from the 90s, are those still viable to be played? Have you been able to maintain those? And even the old reel-to-reel tapes from earlier, are they still viable?
Yeah, reel-to-reel tapes tend to be more viable because the audio cassettes, the problem was with the cassettes themselves a lot of time, because you'll have rusting inside of the cases, whether the screws or the pads have come off, and the tape is still salvageable. But any tape like that we haven't tried to play. It's only if it was together. So most of it is salvageable. Occasionally it isn't, and with the older reel-to-reel tapes, you'll get this flaking of the what's recording the sound, the oxide coming off of it. Sometimes if they're not stored properly, dries out and flakes off.
Reason I ask, every cassette tape from that era that I have, I've tried to play them in recent years, machine just eats them and they're destroyed.
Oh, really? Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, we have to be careful about those sorts of things.
All right, any other questions? One thing that I love about the Howard Armstrong story is that he talked about how he learned his only advantage in Chicago when he got there, and there were so many great blues and jazz performers from the South who were in Chicago in the 30s. His main advantage, he said, was that he could sing the blues in what he called my Tennessee Italian. He'd learned first in La Follette, and then there were other Italian shopkeepers down in the old city where he used to hang out, the Provenzas and Armettas and so forth. But he learned Italian. He learned Yiddish from Jewish shopkeepers around town, and German, I think, too. That he could sing in different languages, sing the blues in different languages. But when he went to Chicago, I think it was the day that Joe Louis had beat up Primo Carnera, who'd been an Italian star, and all the Italians weren't very happy with black people that day, and he thought it was daring to just go out in Chicago and do what he'd been doing. But he said he went into this Italian bar on that day and began singing the blues in Italian, and he was suddenly everybody's best friend. They did not expect that at all.
Yeah, that 78 quarterly articles I mentioned earlier, those are accessible online, I believe through the Internet Archive. I'm not sure. If you Google it, maybe you can find it. I'm not sure, but they're downloadable as PDFs. And it's just a really long interview with him where he talks about his life, you know, even in East Tennessee and Knoxville, and again, continuing into Chicago. And it's just really fascinating. He's an interesting guy. For sure.
Yeah, he remembered a lot of names. He knew Leola Manning and a lot of the other kind of legendary figures of that time. Whose only recordings were at the St. James, you know, African American. We would call her a blues singer, but she did not call herself that. She was she thought the blues is all wrong, as she said in one song title.
And he mentions Bill Ballinger in that clip, and I know Eugene Ballinger was her husband, but I don't know if Bill was a nickname or maybe a relative that also played. But yeah, as you say, it's really fascinating that you'll remember the name, you'll see these things, and then other things like Willie Sievers in the Heartland series turning up and kind of fleshing out the story more.
All right, any other questions?
And thanks, Linda Billman, for confirming the Andersonville, the Sievers.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Thank you, Eric. You do fantastic work down at TAMIS.
Thank you, guys.
Very
so much.
knowledgeable.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, thanks.
Well, thanks everybody for coming out. We appreciate your joining us, and we appreciate your help over the years too. We wouldn't be here without you. So thanks a lot, and stay in touch, and we'll be.